Hey everyone, I'm Tim and welcome to my workshop. Today we're going to be building a small table using the frame from an old Singer sewing machine. We got this table originally a couple years ago from a friend of ours and it's done a great job. We keep it out here to just put plants and small things on, but it gets hit by the weather a lot and it's just slowly started to die. You can see part of the tabletop came off here and the other side is about to come off, so I figured I'd build us a new one.
The first thing I did was cut myself a piece of 1/4-inch plywood. This helped me form the basic shape of the tabletop as well as have something to build around. The Singer sewing machine stand itself is kind of beat up, so I thought it'd be really cool to use some reclaimed pallet wood to make that tabletop. The tabletop is going to be attached to the stand through screws on the bottom side. I decided it would be a good idea to create a framework to give it extra support. After finishing the framework on the bottom side of the tabletop, I was able to start working on the tabletop itself. This is where my OCD really kicked in. I wanted to find the combination or orientation of these boards that produced the least amount of gap. And once I figured out how to do that, it was just a matter of going back and forth to the chop saw and cutting all these pieces to the right length. With all the pieces cut, I moved inside of the garage and started to assemble them. I started assembling the underside support first. I glued the long pieces to the bottom side of the 1/4-inch plywood, then I clamped them. After that, I flipped the board over and started attaching with the nail gun. I repeated this same process with the 4 small pieces. At this point, I think I was jamming out to some music and didn't really remember that I hadn't secured the other 3 pieces, so when I flipped it over to nail that end down, the other 3 pieces fell out. It wasn't really a big deal, just one of those examples of when you're not really paying attention in the assembly process. I added some marks onto the side, that way when I flipped it over, I knew where my supports were. Now that the bottom is done, I finally get to flip it over and start working on the tabletop. The assembly of the top follows the same pattern as the bottom. Add glue to one side, flip it over, and attach it in place. The placement of the first board was the most important. If it wasn't square with the edge of the plywood, then all the other boards would be off as well. So I made sure it was lined up properly with the edge of the plywood, clamped it in place, and tacked it with the nail gun. The top assembly continued quickly after the first one. I would glue it, put it in place, and attach it with the nail gun. I wanted to hide as much of the end grain as I could, so I took another piece of pallet wood and ripped it down to 1.5 inches wide. I used that to make a frame around the tabletop itself. I had originally planned on mitering the corners of this trim. It would have looked really nice, but I also realized that it's going to be sitting on the back patio and it's going to get wet. So as the wood gets wet and expands, it's going to open up those joints and it's going to look pretty bad. So I decided just to use some butt joints and keep it simple. After getting all the trim pieces cut so they fit perfect, we brought everything back into the garage for final assembly. None of my existing clamps were long enough to do this part of the glue up, so I finally had an excuse to go down to Home Depot and pick up a set of these Bessie parallel clamps. It was the first time I've used a set of parallel clamps, but I was really impressed by how easy and how strong they were, so I'll definitely be picking up a couple more sets in the future. All the boards that I ripped and used for trim already had some sort of roundover. But I love using a palm router, so I'll use any excuse to get it out. And here, I used it just to give a little more consistent roundover across the whole project. I gave the whole project a little more time just to make sure that the glue was dry. Then I flipped it over and got out the sewing machine stand. I designed it so that there was 1.5 to 2 inch overhang beyond the stand. And once I had that overhang, I pre-drilled and attached it from the bottom using deck screws. It was right about this time that I realized the diameter of the screw was slightly smaller than the diameter of the mounting hole in the stand. So I came back later and used a countersunk washer to keep the screw from pulling out.
So we got the Singer sewing machine little table finished. I'm really happy with how it turned out. The pallet wood is great, gives just a nice kind of outdoor feel. It's not going to be a finished perfect piece of furniture, but I really like it. So this project is over. Hope to see you again in the future, and until then, keep building.